Good morning, people. How are you doing? Today is the second day of 2024, brand new year. It's about 8:15 in the morning, I think. We're going to just talk about some news. I didn't do a video yesterday, New Year's Day. Had to help my neighbors who were moving, had to help my neighbor who was fixing his fence next door. Spring cleaning, stuff like that. Nothing really exciting down here in Tampa, Florida, for me at least. I'm sure somebody's having an exciting time, but it's not me. How you doing? Happy New Year. Let's see. News. What to talk about. We've talked about this before, and from the beginning of the Al-Aqsa flood campaign. I told you what I thought was the plan behind it, and whether or not I would have particularly made the choice that they made. I don't know. I can't say because I'm not in that situation. However, and other people have come to the same conclusion, like Scott Ritter and many others, that the point was to draw attention to what's going on in Palestine, what Israel is doing, show Israel that they're not untouchable, that the people know they're not untouchable, and in the onslaught that would ensue, expose the nature of the Israeli occupation to the rest of the world once again. And they've done this periodically. Israel has done this periodically with Operation Cast Lead and Pillar of Defense and fucking Edge of Killing Goyim, whatever the fuck the last one was called. Protection's Edge or something. I don't know what it was. They've done this several times over the last couple decades that I've been covering it. And obviously this one's worse. But I think the plan always was, to take it's like, for those of you who remember Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali was one of the best boxers ever. And he was very flamboyant, and he was very out there and open and in your face, and he was a great heavyweight champion. Some would argue the best of all time. He had this thing called rope-a-dope, where if he was up against a slugger, somebody that everyone thought was going to have a puncher's chance with him, he would, float around like a butterfly and sting like a bee bit, but then he would, in the early rounds, would get up against the ropes and kind of bait him in, and then let the guy unload while he covered up his head with his gloves and his stomach with his elbows, and just kind of let the guy wear himself out. And then after about 3 rounds of that, he would go back to being Muhammad Ali. The guy would be all tuckered out, and he wouldn't have to worry about that killer, puncher's chance haymaker being thrown. And he would wear the guy out and either knock him out or win on points. He would deliberately allow him to punch himself out. He would withstand the onslaught in order to amass his offense in the aftermath. And many of us thought that that's exactly what Palestine was doing, and it looks like that's exactly what's happening. Israel has been withdrawing troops now for 24 hours out of northern Gaza. I'll show you a map in a few seconds where the conflict map as of December 22nd, I think it was. And it pretty much hadn't changed since December 22nd. and the areas that were being occupied by Israel in Gaza. And you'll notice that, with the exception of Gaza City, they had taken pretty much the top quarter or third of the Gaza Strip. And there were many Israelis and Israeli businesses who were making plans already for that property. Well, the IDF has pulled out of it, or is pulling out of it, currently pulling out of it. They're leaving northern Gaza. Now, they'll tell you that this is a strategic withdrawal in order to allow for their troops to, resuscitate themselves, renew their vigilance, whatever the fuck it is they'll do in Israel, dancing around, singing songs about wiping out the Goy. And then in preparation for another assault later. That's not going to happen. What's happening is they're losing control of the narrative in Israel, and they're losing control of the narrative in the States. I told you the other day when I mentioned Bernie Sanders actually coming out there and putting the kibosh on the $10.1 billion money from our government to Israel. And he wasn't alone. He wasn't the only one. People are losing the stomach for the bombing of innocent women and children. They just can't continue. Plus, this is an election cycle. So there's too many people in the United States who have conscience, and they can't abide by continually supporting this ruthless attempt at genocide and regime change in Palestine. So it is a strategic withdrawal of troops that's starting to take place. It started yesterday, the 1st, knowing that our attention would be focused elsewhere. They claim that they're going to be regrouping and remassing and then coming back for a second assault someplace else, probably south, but that's idiotic. They can't attack in the south and try to cut the south off, because where are the people north of them going to go? They can't go anywhere. They're just in a pressure cooker, and they're going to just bomb them all to death. They have to always start from the north and work their way down, pushing them into Egypt, pushing them through the crossing. So by giving up the north and allowing Palestinians to return to whatever's left, they're pretty much conceding this campaign. Now, Bibi, of course, and all the rest of them who know they're in deep shit and are going to be removed from office one way or another once this conflict is over, is saying this conflict's not over. Of course not. No. We're going to be fighting this war for at least a year. Basically what he's saying is, I want to stay in office for at least a year, steal as much as I can. Look at it this way. This is what happens in Yemen and in Egypt when we have these dictators who are beneficial to us and our interests. There's a good documentary on my website, in Nicaragua and the Contras, by John Pilger. John Pilger died on the 30th, and I'm saddened by that. He was an outstanding journalist, in the true sense of the word. He was a person of integrity. He was an activist. And he believed in what he covered. He believed in what he did. You don't see that in quote unquote journalism today. They don't teach that in journalism today. They don't. They teach you do and you say what the bosses tell you to do and say. And if you're working for Fox, then you are Republican. If you're working for CNN, then you are Democrat. And that's it. And I've seen them go back and forth. So you know and I know, to them it means nothing. It's just a fucking paycheck. John Pilger was not like that. He was a person of integrity. He and I did have differences of opinion. He didn't know who the fuck I was. I'm just saying he had we had difference of opinions in terms of my understanding of his opinions, but he has no idea who I am, obviously. But we had differences of opinion, specifically when it came to CIA Assange and Edward Snowden, which is not his real name. He fell for these things, these fucking psychological operations. Or at least he appeared to. He said he did. Don't know. Never spoke to the man personally. But we had differences of opinion there. Maybe Turkey. I can't remember. I've got a John Pilger category on my website so you can go and look. We didn't see eye to eye on everything. However, there's a line from a play which I think very highly of called, and the line is, attention must be paid. And attention must be paid. John Pilger was an outstanding journalist. I bring up Pilger and I bring up that video in order to tell you this. I posted his short documentary, 53 minutes. Please go take a look at it. And a brief quote by Max Blumenthal on my website, just down below if you just scroll down. And it's called Nicaragua and the Contras. And people have seen it or watched it, and they've sent me emails or made comments talking about, or DMs, talking about, well, how the government of Nicaragua did this, that, and the other thing, and the government of Nicaragua wasn't that good. What they don't understand is it wasn't the government of Nicaragua, it was the government of fucking Washington, D.C. That's the Somoza government that we installed, the CIA installed, USAID installed. That's what, when he's talking about the atrocities being committed by the government of Nicaragua, that's the government he's talking about. That's the government that prompted the revolution in Nicaragua in 1979. That is still hated to this day by certain folks, a certain class of folks in the West. But I bring up that so I can talk about Somoza briefly. And Pilger covers this beautifully. He lays it all out, how Somoza and his family, they took the money, they took money from the fucking IMF. The IMF loan money would come in, and half of it would end up going to the fucking government. The other half would just go poof. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. How aid money would come in, and a quarter of it would go to would go into the books in the country. The rest would go to him and his family. Somoza government was fucking beyond corrupt. People talk about, what's going on in Nicaragua now, and the family now, and his wife is vice president and all that stuff. Oh my God, it's nepotism. Oh my God. Nowhere near the same scale. Now, I don't know if Ortega and Daniel Ortega, the people of Nicaragua, that's the difference. The people of Nicaragua support Daniel Ortega. They did not support the Somoza government. And they were beyond corrupt. I mean, they were beyond corrupt. Bibi Netanyahu and his cronies are exactly the same. And that's what we do in countries that are our friends. Remember in the back in the day, you watch the movies on the mob, and they say, "Oh, he's a friend of ours." What does that mean? He's mobbed up. That's how they say he's a friend of ours. People say we have no better friend in the Middle East than Israel, and that's what they mean. They're solid, as Joe Biden would call them in Ukraine. They're solid. Netanyahu is corrupt. He is beyond corrupt. By the way, this gives you an idea of how things are changing for the Netanyahu government. They are strategically withdrawing troops from the north of Gaza, while Palestinians are returning to their homes and starting to rebuild in the north of Gaza. This is not something that they had envisioned that they wanted, or at least they told people that they wanted. No, they were going to drive them all down out of the north, at least take that top chunk of Gaza and incorporate it into fucking greater Israel. And then eventually end up taking the rest. That's not going to happen. I told you before, that's never going to happen. They had to keep it going as long as they fucking could, because the people who were the power structure, who were in power on October 7th, who failed to protect the people of Israel. The same people, by the way, who pushed through this contentious piece of legislation to limit the power of the Supreme Court to check the power of the executive. Meaning that Bibi and his buddies wanted to rule Israel by decree, without any possibility of the Supreme Court saying, that's not legal, you can't do that. They wanted to be able to mandate everyone have to give their shots. That, well, no, this is Supreme Court. They wanted to make sure, they wanted to dictate that there are no more fucking cash transactions. Everything is going to a central bank digital currency by decree. No, the Supreme Court says you can't do that. Well, the Supreme Court just issued a ruling yesterday that throws out that fucking piece of legislation. They deemed it unconstitutional. So they lost that. So they're withdrawing their troops, and the Supreme Court has just dealt them a death blow to their fucking dictatorship that they were trying to build with Bibi Netanyahu at the helm. And they're not fighting back against that. They're not pushing back against it. They said, I'll show you in a second. They said that right now we need unity in the country because it's a time of war. He knows damn well the thing that put all those millions of people in the goddamn streets, while he's still refusing to cease fire and return the 100 plus Israelis who are still being held hostage so their families can be reunited with them, simply because, and everyone knows it, it's political. When it's over, he's over. When it's over, the Likudnik party is over. When it's over, the heads of the IDF and Mossad, the intelligence agencies, who ignored warnings about October the 7th for a year before it happened, they're also over. They've been dragging this out for political purposes. Everyone in Israel knows it. And so, the Supreme Court issued this ruling on Monday, knowing damn well Bibi and the Likud party and the Jewish Power Party of Ben Giver, the Jewish Power Party. I'm not fucking kidding. That would be like that would be like the United States having a white power party. I swear to God, I'm not kidding. I'll show you in a second. The translation of the name of the political party of Ben Giver is Jewish Power. God damn. Fuck the Christians. Fuck the Arabs in the country. Jewish Power. So, they understood, the Supreme Court did. Let's deal this blow to him, because he's defenseless. If he had come forward and done some fucking shit to usurp the power of the fucking Supreme Court in Israel, he would have put another 5, 10, 15 million people on the streets, especially in light of what happened on October the 7th, and especially in light of the fact that they knew about it for a year prior to October the 7th, especially in light of the fact that it's turning out people are finding out and figuring out Israelis killed Israelis on October the 7th, and especially since they still got 100 fucking Israelis being held hostage. And all they got to do is stop bombing children and they can return home. That's a lot of fucking pressure on the Bibi Netanyahu government right now. So the reason I mention Somoza is this. Somoza knew it was over. He was bombing his own people in Nicaragua in 78. There was fucking issues going on. He knew it was over. They knew it was over. The writing was on the fucking wall. Our government was talking to him and trying to make fucking arrangements to get him out of the country. And they were stealing everything that wasn't nailed down. Literally. If he could have taken the manhole covers back, he would have taken because the manhole covers had his name on them because his family had the contract to do all the fucking utility work in the fucking country. Anything that could possibly make money, privatizing government functions, his family did it. Everything. That's how he made so much. They had made so much money. Well, I think Bibi's in the same situation. Bibi's time is very short. I believed he would be out before the end of the year. I'm going to say I was close. He's not gone yet, but he won't. He's not long for fucking political power in Israel. And saying that, he's not long for being in Israel. They'll have to get him out, or will have to get him out, and give him some nice fucking cushy landing spot someplace. But let's just take a look at some of the news. I think, how bad is my fucking focus here? Pretty bad. I was off by a bit. See, I don't look at myself when I make videos, so maybe I should more often. Let's take a look at this. Israel pulling troops out of Gaza to, quote, pace itself for the long haul. Let's take a little bit of a look at NBC News here. Probably.
I want to turn now to the Middle East and the major announcement today from Israel that it will withdraw thousands of troops from Gaza. And it comes as the U.S. risks getting drawn further into a conflict in the Red Sea. Josh Letterman explains.
Tonight, the Israeli military says it's pulling thousands of troops out of Gaza for now to pace itself for the long haul. A U.S. official telling NBC News it appears to be the start of the new phase in the war that the Biden administration has been pushing for. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is warning the war is expected to last many more months. That war has been fueling growing tensions between Iran and the West, including in the Red Sea, where over the weekend, Yemen-based Houthis who are backed by Iran tried to hijack a container ship and shot at U.S. Navy helicopters. U.S. forces then sunk 3 Houthi boats, killing everyone on board. Now, Iranian media say Iran has sent in a warship. The Houthis say they're targeting Israeli-bound ships in solidarity with the Palestinians, but have repeatedly attacked ships with no connection to Israel.
Okay. There you go. That's the old declare victory and get out school of Vietnam war planners. Declare victory and leave. Let me show you a map real quick. Here's another thing from the New York Times. Israel says it will pull several brigades from the Gaza Strip. I wanted to show you this. This is a map that I put in here. All right, a link I put in here. I didn't do the map. I've talked about this before. I've shown you what they were doing. In red, they call these evacuation zones. You got to get out of here. This is going to be Israel's property soon enough, according to them. And they say the whole of Gaza City is an evacuation zone. The blue area, as of December 22nd, was where the Israelis were occupying and pretty much had control. However, and as you can see, even south of the south of this, evacuation zone boundary where they said they'd be safe, they decided to invade and see if they could bust out this piece of fucking Palestine for greater Israel as well. Turns out they couldn't. Here's the truth. The truth is they've lost a lot of fucking soldiers. I've told you this before. In 2006, when the birth pangs of the new Middle East were taking place, as Condi Rice described them, Israel attacked Lebanon, and Israel got their asses kicked. Same situation is happening now with Hezbollah. Hezbollah is putting a hurting on northern Israel. And according to a number of sources, Scott Ritter being one again, Scott Ritter having his issues, but then again, don't we all? But up to 80,000 Israelis have been forced to evacuate their homes in northern Israel because of that conflict, which does not seem to be letting up, and Hezbollah has no intention of quitting until Israeli troops leave Gaza, which is quietly happening now. So, let's get back to this conflict here. So what's going on now is, I'll show you an article in a second here where Palestinians are returning to these areas up in here. The troops that were patrolling these areas and keeping these areas, dealing with snipers, dealing with tunnels and people popping up out of tunnels, tunnel rats as they used to call them in Vietnam, popping up and setting explosives on the side of their tanks. A real insurgency against an occupying force that's not strong enough to deal with a straight up war here and an occupation here, plus Hezbollah in the north. They don't have the manpower for it. Israel was getting into trouble because people were refusing to be drafted. Young Israelis are refusing to. Some of them are refusing to be drafted. You see all kinds, and I showed you a video put together by Max Blumenthal, people dancing around full of hate and all of this shit in Israel. But that's not every Israeli. There are a number of people who are saying no to being drafted. One of them was just sentenced last week, but more cases are pending. It's turning into a real fucking PR crisis inside Israel, not just outside, like the Hasbara fucking money is going to try to curb, but certainly inside Israel. Young people don't want to fucking fight for this thing. They want their fucking hostages back, and they understand why Bibi Netanyahu is keeping them, refusing to fucking withdraw, because it's political. It's sick of. There are problems taking place in terms of trade. So businesses are shutting down. There's a strain on the economy in Israel. It's having its effect. It's having the exact effect that Hamas and Palestinian resistance groups expected it to have. Not entirely sure this withdrawal signifies a victory. It's a partial victory, of course, obviously, for the people of Palestine, but certainly not the victory they're looking for. The victory they're looking for is Bibi's withdrawal and resignation, and the end of the Likud party, or at least the end of the Likud party's influence and Jewish Power Party's influence. Trying to get the far, far, far right radical Zionist element at least curbed in Israel to some degree. Whether or not that ends up with there being a real two-state situation going on and international fucking observers have to come in and UN peacekeepers have to come in between the states and they go back to the June 1967 Green Line borders and get the fucking settlers out of the West Bank, and the sanctions are lifted and the restrictions in terms of shipping are lifted. Whether they get to that point, I don't know. I certainly hope in the future that's the case, because that's the only path to peace. Bernie Sanders was asked in an interview recently, and somebody posted this up there and was pissed off about it. McKetchin, I think, was pissed off about it. When this young girl asked him, well, she said, there are a number of Palestinians who believe in the one-state solution where you would have all of the, there'd be just one state and not two, and Palestinians would be free, and Arabs would be free, and Christians would be free and treated as equals in Israel. And of course, Bernie Sanders said, well, that would be the end of Israel as we know it. Jewish Israel. Jewish power Israel. And he's absolutely correct. You shouldn't be pissed off at Bernie Sanders about that, because it was a trick question. And it's a bullshit. It's a question based on bullshit. Her asking him if it would be okay if Israel took all of Palestine and called it Israel, and then claimed that Palestinians were free in Israel, being educated by Israeli fucking schools, teaching them that Palestine never existed. Would that be okay, Mr. Sanders? And of course his response was, well, that would be the end of Israel. No, that would be the end of Palestine. The two-state solution is the only solution. Why? Because there are two states. That's it. There's Israel now and there's Palestine now. Palestine exists. Anything else, the one-state solution, is Israel takes everything for itself and treats Palestinians like they treat Palestinians and Arabs and Christians now in that country as second-class citizens. Period. End of story. So, in a way, he's right. And that fictionalized world of just Israel, where you can have a Palestinian fucking prime minister, which would never fucking happen. But he's right. That the state of Israel as it exists now would no longer exist. Of course it wouldn't. It's Jewish power Israel now. Even though the rest of the parties don't have that in the name of their party, they still have that at the foundational core of what they represent. They're just fine and dandy in a country that treats anybody who isn't Jewish as a second-class citizen. And that's a fact. So, Bernie Sanders is absolutely correct. But that would never happen. It would be Israel, Palestine would be gone, and the Palestinians and the Christians and Arabs and anybody else would be treated the same way they are being treated right now. And contrary to what she said, this reporter said in her question, there's not a whole lot of Palestinians, except the sycophantic Palestinians from the Palestinian Authority, who would be just fine with that because they would be the house N-words themselves working for Massa, and everybody else could be just indentured servants and slaves. Those Palestinians would be just fine with that. This is the issue. Palestinians in Gaza and Palestinians in the West Bank, just not the Palestinian Authority, do not want to be subservient to an Israeli fucking authority in their fucking country. And they have every right to feel that way. And they're not going to. Even if that meant they had to take 30,000 fucking people being killed, 11,000 of them being children, being constantly bombed by U.S. fucking made weapons and U.S. taxpayer paid for weapons being delivered by the IDF, even if that's what it took. If in the end the result is the rest of the world says, you know what, enough's enough. You get back to your corner, you get back to your corner, we're going to put referees in the middle. Don't you fuck with the referees, because then we'll fuck with you. You don't occupy them, they don't fucking suicide vest you, and everybody in a generation or two will come to get along just fine as neighbors. That's the solution. That's the only fucking solution. And that's the only fucking solution the people in Gaza are willing to fucking accept. That's why this whole thing, this whole we're going to take all of Gaza and kick everybody out. But Ben Giver's still talking about in a few seconds, I'll show you that, was doomed to fail from the beginning. It was never going to work. Regardless of what the Houthis do, regardless of what Hezbollah does, the Palestinians themselves were not going to, you were going to have to kill 1 million plus Palestinians. And they knew, like Muhammad Ali, leaning up against them ropes, they knew their opponent didn't have the fucking stomach to finish the fucking job. Now, you can say that's fucking brutal, and how dare they make a decision like that? Well, the people who made the decision have also lost family and property and friends. And they have to live with that decision the rest of their lives. But who knows what kind of decision one has to make when they live in a resistance in an occupied world, as bad as the occupation was in the world's largest ghetto that is Gaza. So this is the conflict map as of December 22nd. And apparently they're leaving. The troops are now leaving these areas up here, north of Gaza City. And the rest of it's going to be, it won't be long before they've left the rest. Palestinians are returning to North Gaza after Israel pulls back its troops at the high cost of war. Thousands of Palestinians have reported returning to the north of Gaza Strip after the withdrawal of some Israeli forces from the area. After returning to northern Gaza, one told Al Jazeera TV that people were sitting and sleeping among the debris, where the smell of blood and death is everywhere. A lot of massacres have been committed here. The resilience of the people here will always be stronger than the occupation army. Another woman said she would never abandon North Gaza, despite a lack of food and clean water. I will never leave my land and house and family, despite the suffering. Israeli military said earlier it was withdrawing thousands of troops from the Gaza Strip, and the first significant troop pullback since the devastating war began nearly 3 months ago. In a statement on Monday, the regime's army said the move is expected to significantly alleviate economic burdens and enable troops to gather strength for upcoming activities in the next year as the fighting will persist and their services will be needed. The announcement came as fighting tapered off in northern areas of Gaza, though clashes do remain to rage on in the south. So, far-right Israeli minister urges eviction of Palestinians from Gaza. This is the Itamar Ben Gvir, who is the national security minister. He still thinks that they should just keep bombing and killing and killing and bombing until all the people leave. Until they, how did he put it? How does he put it? He wants to encourage residents to immigrate to countries around the world. Yeah, hey, take the hint and get out before we bomb you and kill you all. He told a meeting of his ultra-nationalist Atzma Yehudit, or Jewish Power Party. Ben Gvir, the head of the white nationalist, the white power party in fucking Israel. He's not doing them any favors. Running his mouth. Israel's come to a dead end at the end of the year. This is from Mondo Weiss. You can go take a look at it. This was destined to happen. We talked about this before. Mondo Weiss wrote about it. Philip Weiss wrote about it. So did, and of course, Scott Ritter talked about it. It was destined to fail because, quote, none of the fixes answer the core problem. Palestinians refuse to accept the lesser status under Zionist rule. I told you before, they will not accept the Palestinian Authority. They will not accept being a fucking vassal state to glorious Israel. They will not accept apartheid rule in Gaza. And after this, the jury is still out on what's going to happen in the West Bank. But we will see. There's a good article here by Kit Knightley talking about the year global government takes shape. I fully expected, coming from Off Guardian, that it was going to be, the socialists and the communists are taking over. And he's not going that direction. I disagree with him on a couple things. Again, he has no idea who the fuck I am, so not like we disagree, but I disagree with him on a couple of aspects of this. But it's still a good read, which is why I posted it up here for you. He makes some valid points, but they're obvious. He's talking about, yes, global warming is going to be the big thing. Yes, central bank digital currencies. Yes, digital IDs, and of course, he doesn't bring up the Rona and the Rona 2, which is going to happen in 2025, if not 2024, before the election. Because remember, the World Health Organization's plan goes into effect in May of 2024, and the election's in 2024 in November. I would not be surprised if they didn't drop yet another pandemic on us by then. We will see. And then, of course, there is this. I strongly recommend. Again, I don't get paid. There's no advertising on this. I'm not telling you to go to my website and because I want money. I'm telling you this because this is a very good breakdown of what happened in Nicaragua. Now, you'd have to be, at least as far as my coverage of Nicaragua over the years, decade and a half now, as far as I understand, you'd have to go in and actually talk to people in Nicaragua who might have a better understanding, whether just exactly how accurate it is. But I gave you kind of a brief rundown on it. Start this video off. I'd strongly recommend it. Once again, Pilger was a journalist in the true sense that we don't, that we certainly see very little of today. I'm very sorry to see him go. My heart goes out to his friends and his family and his loved ones. He definitely was an icon in the community. An amazing activist and an amazing journalist. And he had influence. He influenced many, many others, and he will continue to influence others for decades to come, generations to come, his work. And that really is, I think, a positive influence. And that really is, I think, really the best thing anyone can say about somebody in their passing. Anyway, we'll see how it goes. To those of you who are going to gloat that Bibi Netanyahu was not gone by the beginning of the year, all right, yeah, okay. All right. We'll see if he makes it past January. I'm not going to do prediction, though. I got one wrong, so I'm not going to do another prediction. He won't make it through February. How about that? I'll see you next time.